Great. Hi, everybody. I see everybody is coming in, so we're just going to give a few more minutes for people to settle in, but welcome. My name's Debbie Schwartz. I'm the founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 Facebook group, and lots of other things we do, but we're going to have a fun night tonight talking to Becky Sabky about her recent new book, Valedictorians at the Gate, and kind of all her knowledge about college admissions. But I'm just going to officially start just a few more minutes to let people settle in. But while we're waiting, it's always fun if people will share where they're watching from, how many kids they have, what year their kids are in college or high school. I'm assuming most people are not in college yet, but just it gives us a sense of who's out there, who's with us tonight. And while you were doing that, I'm just gonna kind of share a few housekeeping rules. So, oh, Los Angeles, great. I'm glad we got some West Coast people, and Colorado, so we got some Central Time. Oh, good. Lots of people. So here's my housekeeping comments, is that everybody is here tonight. This is a meeting. It's not a webinar. Personally, I like the meeting settings better because we can see each other, whoever wants to be on video. And, you know, once in a while, people actually do unmute themselves, kind of raise their hand and ask a question, which is fine. But if you don't have anything to say, please keep yourself unmuted. We do have somebody who watches in the background, so in case there's too much noise, we will mute you. If you end up to be unmuted. I should have said, please keep yourself muted. And keep asking questions in the chat. I'm going to look at the chat while I talk to Becky. If there's a question that kind of relates to what we're talking about, I'll bring it in then. But otherwise, we'll probably scroll through the questions at the end. But, you know, feel free to put in your questions as you have them, because it's hard to remember them all at the end. So one last little piece of fun housekeeping is that the publisher of Valedictorians at the Gate, Henry Holt, is giving away 10 free books. And we set it up so that I have somebody here who you might see her name on social media. It's Mindy. And she's going to randomly pick 10 people who have shown up tonight. And so she's gonna kind of do it throughout the evening. We'll sprinkle it through, and she'll let me know, I'll announce it, and then she'll contact you because we need to get your address. But that's just a nice freebie, hopefully for 10, it will be for 10 people who showed up tonight. So thanks for showing up. Okay. I think we're ready to get going. And one last thing, because I always get this question, which is fine. This is recorded. You will get a link to the recording. We're actually probably going to send it out Saturday morning because we have something else we have to send out tomorrow. But it will be posted on Facebook if you want to find it faster and watch it there. So, okay. Let's get started. Thank you all for being here. It's great to see everybody sharing where they're from and their students. So thanks, Becky, for being willing to talk with us tonight. And I'm just going to read a little bio about yourself, and then maybe you can share a little bit about your background as well. But everybody, this is Becky Sabky, and she's a former director of international admissions from Dartmouth College. She's a graduate of Colby College, but she received her Master's of Arts in Liberal Studies degree from Dartmouth. And then you went on to become an admissions officer there. She lives in Vermont, but in addition to all of this college and admission stuff, she also has written she's been a monthly newspaper columnist, a blogger, and she's written a children's book. And it says the name of the children's book is called Little Rippers. So you've had a whole range of stuff outside the world of college.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Debbie. I'm so excited to be here tonight. And I'm even more excited by looking at where you're all logging in from, because it's so thrilling to me that it's still summertime and you're taking the time out to spend an hour with us just to think about college and think about the process. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you, Debbie, for hosting me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So here, I'm just gonna hold up the book again. We're gonna talk about, lots of interesting stuff in it, but it's called Valedictorians at the Gate. And did it officially, when did it publish? Like a week ago?
Last Tuesday, 1 week and 1 day. Or 2
Okay.
weeks.
Right. So we're going to be putting a link in the comments of where people can buy it, but they can Google it. They can, I'm sure, find it on Amazon, and the link that we have, I think, goes to lots of different places if you want to support like more independent bookstores as well. I'd love to, if you can tell us a little bit what you started telling me before we started about like how you came to write the book and how long it took, and there's a little story behind it.
Yeah. So I worked at Dartmouth for 13 years. Before that, I worked at St. Lawrence University, a private liberal arts school in upstate New York, for 2 years. And I left Dartmouth with the birth of my son, my firstborn son. And at the time, I quickly wrote an op-ed that was something that had been on my mind for a long time during my career in admissions. And it was about the most memorable and helpful college recommendation letter I had ever read in my career. And as you would imagine, Dartmouth gets thousands and thousands of applications every year. Every application has 3 recommendation letters. I imagine I read tens of thousands of recommendation letters in my career. And the one that stood out the most was from a high school custodian. And he spoke to a student's intangible qualities. He said in the letter that particular student he was writing on behalf of remembered the name, or asked his name, which no one else in the school had ever bothered to do. And so towards the end of my career, I was really reflecting on that, because I think, as we all know, the college process is very stressful. There's tons of pressure on our young people. And I wanted to say something when I was leaving the admissions office. And so I wrote this op-ed. It got picked up by the New York Times, and it went viral overnight.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize. I thought you somehow had an in and you wrote it for the New York Times. So you just didn't even have that intention.
No, I wrote it. I submitted it to them. I did.
Okay.
I submitted it to my local. I submitted it to a lot of papers, and the New York Times printed it. And the reaction, I have to say, wasn't surprising, because I knew it was going to strike a chord, because it was something that was, a lot of us are thinking about, right? What is this process doing to our kids? What's happening on the other side? However, I wasn't expecting that a literary agent would reach out to me and say, hey, this needs to be a book. And so long story short, that was, over 4.5 years ago. And I started writing a book. And the purpose of my book writing was twofold. Number one, to be prescriptive and help people, because I believe in trying to help people as much as possible through this process. So giving prescriptive advice, but also to tell stories about being an admissions officer and making them confidential, so that I wasn't, sharing any of Dartmouth's secrets or exposing any particular applicants, but really helping people understand the humanness of this process.
Right.
Almost as a call to action to let's think about this and what it's doing to our kids, and how we can best take control of the process as an applicant to get into college, but also have some perspective.
Right. Well, thank you for writing it, because I think what's so helpful about it, and I'm just looking over here, and this is, and actually Dan has done these things with me, and people know that, we've like talked to other people like Jeff Salingo, who's talked about, the admissions process, but having read a lot of books now and having just read your book, I think what's really nice and different is that, everybody else who writes about the college admissions, it's kind of like they're an outsiders, it's like from an industry view, and, maybe they have been an observer, and, so they can give that interpretation, but, you were living it, you were making the decision. So I feel like by reading it, I got a little sense of how your mind worked, when you were an admissions officer. And I think that that's helpful, for people going through this process. It starts to open up the black boxness of it, about like how the decisions are made. Not that there's a strict formula, but it gives you kind of what all the inputs might be to it.
Right. And that was my hope. I feel like if there are any takeaways that I hope people take from this book, one is that admissions is a business. It is not a reflection of any one applicant's self-worth or worthiness. And that was something I learned. And I start in the book, page 1, I tell you that I applied to Dartmouth in 1997 and I was denied. So I'm also a sympathetic narrator, I hope. I'm just a sympathetic person, and that Dartmouth was my first choice school. I wanted to get in. I had checked all the boxes. I was doing as much as I could. And I ended up at my fifth choice school, Colby College in Maine, which I loved, right? It fit me. I had a great experience. And what's interesting is, my road, my professional path, I ended up in the Dartmouth admissions office making decisions on other students, right? But I learned quickly, at highly selective colleges, where the admit rates are 10, 5% even these days, which is crazy, that it is a business. I mean, there are priorities of every college. I think we all know it, but I'm not sure we all really kind of wrap our head around what that means when it comes to these incredibly competitive percentages.
Right.
And so for me, I think, I went in there thinking, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm in the committee room. I'm seeing how the sausage is made. And yet the reality of here are 10 applications and they're all incredibly strong. And I can only, vote on one, was eye-opening how hard this work really is.
Right. No, absolutely. And I'm actually glad you brought up that comment about this is a business. And I want to get back to it because I definitely, well, that's my opinion before, and I saw you focus on it in the book. But before we even delve in, I'm just so that people know, I mean, you worked at Dartmouth. It is and you kind of had, you call it like competitive selective admissions. Is that like the phrase you seem to use? But do you think that what you wrote about in the book, like only applies to the Ivy or Ivies or beyond? So I want people to understand that.
Right. Yeah. No. I'm here to help everybody, and I in the book I talk about, my goal is to help students, put their best foot forward and recognize that college is not an endpoint. It's not a prize. It's a stepping stone on hopefully a very long intellectual journey. And that was another one of my big takeaways. Is it used to drive me crazy. It was cringeworthy when people would see, getting into whatever school as the endpoint, right? Like I got into, Susquehanna, therefore I'm good to go. And that's not the point is, this is the beginning of another 4 years. And after that, this is a building block. Some students, it's not, college is probably not right for them. Some students, I wish we'd do more for our community colleges. So in the book, I definitely give prescriptive advice about the Common Application, which is an application that, hundreds of colleges in the United States use. But, I'm trying to help people realize how to put their best foot forward on an application, no matter where they're applying, and also how to take control back of the process that feels so out of their control.
No, absolutely. I think we'll touch on that. And just to give people kind of like a structure of what we're going to talk about tonight, I just thought we would talk about kind of the industry, which you already started, kind of this business of college and admissions, and then maybe talk a little bit about like the years in high school and what, how students should be handling it. And then we'll touch on some interesting things that you mentioned about the process itself, like the Common App and letters of recommendations and that stuff. But I absolutely picked up. And maybe we're kindred spirits because before, even reading this book and when I kind of came to this space, it's the first thing I kind of make people aware is that it is a business that's going on here. Colleges are business, and that is not bad. It's just a recognition. And you really emphasize that, and I really appreciate it. In fact, I was going to count the number of times you said college is a business. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about that and even give the examples, and in some ways you're the sales people in the marketing department and kind of what you're, there's underlying goals that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And so admissions is a business. And I think what I mean by that is that these schools, at the end of the day, they want to stay in business, right? Every school is different. Their priorities are different. Some schools, athletics, are a huge chunk of the way they make money. And, they're huge athletic booster schools. Some schools, want to cater to particular types of students, right? Like we're a school that really helps with engineering. We're a school that really does arts well, whatever it is, whatever their thing is. But at the end of the day, they're trying to stay in business. And so to do so, it's complicated. And that's what Jeff Selingo, that's what Jacques Steinberg, there's so many books written about this, right? The finance of keeping businesses, of keeping colleges open. So the underbelly of, colleges want to be ranked higher, right? In US News and World Report, they want to have better rankings therefore they get more applications, therefore their alumni, give money back to the school. There's so many moving pieces here. And I think it can be overwhelming if you're just a student thinking, hey, I just want to apply to Davidson, I don't want to think about all this other stuff. But I think it's important to remember that the challenge here is that the admissions office is going to admit who is right for their institution in the pool of applicants within that year. And what happens is that you guys don't see the other pool of applicants and you don't know what the changing priorities are. And they do change. They change from time to time. There are always at some schools, like for Dartmouth, for example, there's an athletic program. There are athletic recruits. That is one of the priorities, and that is run through a system. Other priorities are to have a very diverse class. And so one of the things they're looking for is diversity in the class in so many different ways, right? And so, but from time to time it will change, and they'll say, hey, we just started, I'm making this up right now, but, we just started a Latin program. Let's find some students to come in our Latin major. Like, things are changing. And so what's hard for the actual applicant is that's out of your control.
Right. Somebody actually even messaged already and said, how can we find out the priorities of the college? It's hard.
It's hard. Yeah. It's hard. And sometimes we wouldn't know until that year. I mean, things change, right? And what you won't know, the most important piece here is you don't know who else is in the pool. So you're one applicant of maybe, 10,000, right? You can't control who else is in the pool. What you can control is your own application being as thorough, we can talk about this later, but being as thorough and helpful to the admissions committee as possible. What you can control is where you are applying. And I think that is the most critical piece. And I think we rush, and this is the blame of the admissions office, but we rush you into the application process, and there isn't a lot of time to search for schools.
Right.
And that's,
I saw you. I love you actually made an analogy of, it's kind of like it's like a yin and a yang, like the beginning of the process, the students and families are really in control because you do get to decide where you're going to apply. Once you apply, you're kind of a little bit in that waiting game because then the colleges are in control as they sift through everything. But then once you get back the decisions, it kind of pings back to the students and the parents, and then you're back in control about where you're going to accept.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. And so I try to just tell folks, be very, very thoughtful about the earlier stages, the thinking about colleges, being open-minded and taking the pressure off early. I mean, I talk in the book, people ask me all the time, when should I start? When should I be taking the PSATs? All of that will happen. Like that will figure itself out. But I think in general, it's very hard. We put a lot of pressure on our kids to figure out at the age of 17, 18, like, do you want to be an engineer? Because then if you want to go to an engineering school, you have to go here, right? There's already all this pressure. And I think kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, freshman and sophomore year, let's talk about colleges vaguely. Let's talk about the difference between a liberal arts school and a different type of school. Let's talk about merit scholarship. It was amazing to me how many students didn't know what a merit scholarship was, right?
Yeah.
So let's start educating students, earlier in a more kind of thorough and in-depth way. Therefore, so by the time they're making their college list, they're not making the mistake. And this is my opinion, but I think it's a mistake when a kid applies to all 8 Ivies. I think it's silly, right? Your chances are very low. They have very low.
Well, forget about chances. We just know that they're completely different schools.
Exactly. It drives me crazy.
Right.
And so, and I also think, people will say, well, how do I eventually, make that list? And I think, well, when you start broadly, right, you think, okay, I'm a kid, someone said they were from Orlando, right? I'm from Orlando. I want to be in driving distance from my parents, and I'm interested in biology. Okay, there are enough schools, right? I'm, now I might want to do club soccer, and I also want to go to a school that has no fewer than 10,000 kids. I mean, you have to kind of start somewhere. But I think it's amazing how many schools are out there for a lot of the similar stuff. And so I think a broad conversation starting early so there's less pressure on you because the pressure will build. And also, don't apply to schools that all have 10% or less admission because you're going to get burned. Like you have to kind of think about schools that are, less selective. Less selective, but that you'd still be thrilled to be at. And you will be.
Right. So, like maybe sticking a tiny bit longer in this concept of business or colleges as a business, talk a little bit about like testing. And I know this past year, there's a lot of test optional, but like how test scores and, fit into this process. And even though you weren't in the admission season this past year with test optional, do you have any like hypothesis of what went on there? Because, they were inundated because of being test optional, and I assume it also maybe made it a little harder to kind of sift through applications. And I just can't imagine having to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you pointed out too, I have not been in the office in a couple of years.
Right,
So
right.
this is, a lot of this is speculating, but I still talk, I'm still in with colleagues or friends. But my big thing, and this is something that I thought always surprised people, but I think when it came to testing, we love talking about testing. There's a lot of money to be made in testing. There's a lot of stress around testing. And yet the pools that develop, the pool at Dartmouth, the pool at St. Lawrence, the pool at Rutgers, the pool at UNH, they tend to be self-selected. And so what that means is that students will open up US News and World Report and they'll say, okay, I'm a B+ student who has, around a 1200 SAT. And, a book like US News and World Report will tell them what the median SAT scores are, what the, GPAs, and so the pool self-select. So at Dartmouth, we didn't see kids who had straight C's on their transcript, right? We saw kids who had very strong grades, who had very strong test scores for the most part. And so testing itself became one piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole, it's one piece of the puzzle, but it usually, the testing part usually made sense in context of the other academic components. And what I mean by that is that we would maybe read an applicant who, maybe it was the valedictorian of her class, had straight A's, but came from, an under-resourced school, or maybe a family. We know that testing and socioeconomic background go hand in hand, thanks to the research that's been going on right now. So we might see a kid who has straight A's, who's at an under-resourced school, whose teachers in the recommendation would say, hey, Jane here, is the most engaged kid in her class. She brings conversation that is at a higher level than her peers. However, she's not that great of a test taker, right? So we'd be, someone would tell us about it before we'd even get to that testing. And if Jane was still so intellectually, exciting to us, regardless of that testing score, we could still take her because we'd have room for the averages to, with one. But what happened mostly is that we get really strong kids who all kind of have the same testing because it's a self-selecting group. And I found that to be true at St. Lawrence. I mean, I feel like these pools self-select, and then what happens is we publish, hey, here's our average SAT score.
Of course,
right? So with the test optional stuff, I mean, my best advice is take it if it's not inconvenient, because what's great is that if you do poorly, like this is not rocket science, right? If you don't do well, send it in.
Right.
If you do well, send it in. And if you don't know what well is, look at what the averages are, and then take your own context into it. Think about, hey, do I think this represents me? I think and this is just my opinion, I don't think we're going to be very surprised with what happens with test optional years, because again, I think it's a self-selecting group based on who these students are with their academic profiles. And so while we love to get obsessed about testing, and I was the same way, I was upset, whatever I got in the book, I talk about this, I remember my test score, my husband has no idea what he got. But I think for students, I think you should test. I think you should test prep. You don't have to spend a ton of money on it. Get a book from your library. Do your best on tests. But don't forget that, I'll speak for myself, we would rather take a kid who had phenomenal grades and recommendations with not so great testing than, unfortunately, at schools like Dartmouth, we would see the opposite. We'd see kids with perfect SATs who the teachers would say, it comes naturally. Right. And that was the kiss of death, to be frank.
Right, because it could have come naturally, but then they didn't do anything with it.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's definitely helpful advice, because it's a little confusing these days, with test optional and, and all these numbers, that increased with all, the number of applications that happened at the schools. So definitely good advice. So, so talk a little bit about, like high school, and you have a comment that says the most important thing you can do to prepare for college is to go to high school. And I think that there's more to that comment than just like the surface of it. It's really to do high school. Like, people should enjoy high school. Like, don't go to high school just for the purpose of like going to college, of getting into college. So yeah, I'd love to hear if you have more to share about I mean, your kids are young now, but I guess when your kids go to high school, like, what type of advice are you going to give them about how to do high school? And like, what type of advice would you give other teenagers about how to do high school versus do your best versus trying to get into a good school?
Yep, absolutely. And I think this goes back to taking back control of the process and stop worrying about what you think admissions committees want you to do, because you don't know. Right? You don't know. And I was talking to a reporter this morning who asked me, what was kind of the most surprising thing to me during my career? And I said, the most surprising thing was more like the most gut-wrenching thing about how disappointed families and students were when they checked every box and still weren't admitted. And for me, I'm like, let's flip that. Why bother checking boxes you don't care about? Instead, check some boxes for your own sake, and that's just going to make you, frankly, a better college student, which is the point. Back to my college isn't the end point. And so, and in my experience, if students were engaged in and liking high school, they were doing stuff anyway. So their applications were full, right? I found, the senioritis, we saw a lot of senioritis, right? You got into your school, particularly the early decision students, and then their grades would fall or they'd drop out of whatever they said they were doing. And, occasionally we'd have to have conversations with students, but big picture stuff, it's more important that if you're taking, honors French senior year and you slack off after you're admitted to a college, when you get to French 5 at a liberal arts school, you're going to have to pass. And so my thing is, college isn't this endpoint. It is, getting into college is a process, but I think high school is important for the sake of high school. It's going to help you when you get to college. Developing relationships with teachers, I said it before, but teacher recommendations, are a big part of this application, and developing relationships with teachers is only going to help you develop relationships with professors when you get to college. And so I think taking back control, stop worrying about what you think colleges might be looking for and start saying, wow, this is an opportunity in my life to take improv. I might never be able to do that again. Let's do it.
Yeah, you had a story in the book about, I think you ran into a mother-daughter, and the daughter really wanted to take a vocal class, and the mother was I guess, nervous that it wouldn't look good, and you were take the vocal class.
Well, and that's a truth. It's interesting working in admissions, because I think students are sometimes afraid to take classes that they might fail at, right? Or they might get a lower grade. And if you're a student who has gotten really strong grades and you're a senior and you think, I want to try art, but I'm afraid of trying art because it might hurt my GPA, which might keep me out of getting wherever, I assure students that, and again, this goes to presenting a thorough application and doing your best on the actual paper application. We would never fault a student if they said to us, hey, I've gotten, strong grades and been engaged in my school for 4 years, but my senior year, I wanted to take art for the sake of taking art, right? Because I wanted to try cartooning or whatever they want to do. And I got a B-. What I would suggest to that student is have your teacher from that art class write one of your teacher recommendations or an extra teacher recommendation saying, hey, he went out of his comfort zone. He tried something new. We would never fault you for that. Even if you wrote about that for your own sake. I mean, we're not going to hold it against a kid for going out of his comfort zone and trying something, because that's the point of college, right? Learning. So, I'll be honest, you can't go too crazy, if you're getting straight C's your senior year because you're trying, but I do think, there are ways to go out of your comfort zone and still feel confident in your application by presenting the why behind the actual evidence.
Right. And that's a really good point. Maybe we can talk about, because what I also got out of reading your book, and it goes two ways, is that it's a puzzle on both sides. It's a puzzle for families to really figure out the college, and and we can talk about your suggestions on college visits and kind of how you learn more. But if people put themselves in your seat, it's also a puzzle that you're putting together, and all you have in front of you is this application and a transcript and an essay, and you're trying to pick the pieces of it and put together what this person is all about. Yeah. So I'm only saying that to emphasize what you're saying is that people should, if they've done things, they should share the whys behind it, because you can't get into their head to understand the why.
Yep. Yeah, my best, and I'm looking at some of the questions there, and I'm going to try to answer a bunch of them with one answer, but you know, a lot of people would say, how do you read, right? Here's the application, how do you read? And every school is different, but at many, you know, similarly selective schools to Dartmouth and St. Lawrence, what happens is it's a multi-reader process because they don't want control to be in one person, right? And usually the first reader is geographic. So I was the person for New Jersey, for example. So New Jersey folks would come to me. But what happens is, you know, we read 130, 140 applications per week. So you have to move through these applications. And so what you're doing, it's almost like being a lawyer, is that you're collecting evidence from, you know, what is being presented to you. And so like I tell students, like your personal statement's going to get boiled down to one sentence, right? And if you think it can't be, it will be. So you have to be more concise, right? So we're, you know, the first person is kind of going through reading, but, you know, we're not spending a ton of time. We're trying to get through it, make notes and push it in a direction, right? Really, the first reader is just pushing in oh, this feels weaker within the context of the pool. This feels stronger within the context of the pool. Then it usually goes to a second person. The second person usually agrees or disagrees. And typically at most schools, you know, it's the dean or a director who makes the final decision and kind of keeps an eye on the top of the pool. And usually, you know, there are, you know, people who, you know, associates that are going through the denies. But, you know, what's funny is the first couple of weeks, we never make decisions because we have to read the pool. We have to know what's in the pool. So it's a lot of like, we can tell, you know, if we read an application early in the process, it's going to get a second read later in the process. We read all the applications first so that we know kind of what we're up against.
Got it. Interesting.
And, you know, back to kind of like, what can you do? What I focus on is just, we're looking for you to help us read these applications. And for me, you know, in New Jersey, there were some schools that would send us lots of applications every year, but there were other schools, you know, off the beaten path, if you will, where we wouldn't be as familiar with the school. And so I would tell students, just because I went to one of those high schools myself, you know, it's helpful for you to say, hey, hello, you probably, you know, you might not have never heard of my school, but let me tell you a little bit about it. And there are ways you can do that in the application. There's one section that says, is there anything else you want us to know? And so many people leave it blank. Right. That's an opportunity to tell us anything. You know, I write in the book, and this is kind of jumping ahead, but, you know, I write in the book that for us, sometimes we would tell more about a student by their email address handle.
Oh, I was going to ask you to share that story.
Yeah, well, but it's true. There are ways to kind of get information into the application, you know, besides the big essay that everybody's worried about. And so I just say, be your best advocate and, you know, almost view this as an application contest, in that you want to give as much information. You want to help this lawyer, you know, the admissions officer on your side, say, hey, you know, here's a reason why this looks stronger in the pool or this looks weaker in the pool.
Okay, so going along that path of kind of like giving as much, or trying to gather as much information, evidence, you know, right, to the lawyer / admissions officer. Talk about letters of recommendation, because they aren't. It is in the control of a student, and it isn't a little bit. You know what I mean? So, but you know, I think there's something there.
Yeah. So most applications require 3 recommendations. One is a guidance counselor recommendation. The other 2 are college counselor recommendation. The other 2 are teacher recommendations. And you're absolutely right, Debbie. Like, we do take into context that some recommendation writers might not A, have the time, B, have the training. And so, you know, there are a wide array of letters that we see. However, you do get 3 letters, right? And so, you know, you might not know, I didn't have a close relationship with my college counselor. She was more busy with, you know, she was busier with detention duty than she was with college counseling. So that one was kind of like, you know, she, who knows what she wrote. But my teachers, you know, at least one of those teachers I was hoping would go to bat for me, because I had developed a relationship with them. For all of you out there to take a little bit control of the process, I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with writing down a little list to give to your teacher, especially if you haven't had your teacher in a year or two. Just saying, hey, even if you have a good relationship with them, hey, remember that, chemistry project that I did that, I exploded the volcano all over the room, but I came to help clean it up. And then we got a conversation, help your teachers, just like being a lawyer, help your teachers. My brother-in-law is a history teacher. He writes dozens of these every year. It's so time consuming. And so I think the more you can do to help your recommenders, the more you can do for anybody. That I say for the alumni interviewers too, if you get an alumni interview, bring a resume because it helps them remember you from the 10 other people they met at Starbucks that day.
100%. So just FYI, I actually went to Dartmouth. So Becky and I kind of talked about that a little, and I actually interview as an alumni for Dartmouth too. And when students come with their resumes, whew, that's going to make this so much easier.
Yeah.
Because I have like built-in notes, So I agree. So I guess, and also about the letters of recommendation, what about, there's always this question of, I'm going to make this up. My student wants to be pre-med. Shouldn't they have the chemistry or biology teacher be the, the person who writes letters of recommendation, but they didn't have the best, relationship? Will that look bad, Yeah.
That's a really good question to ask individually of each college, because some will say, if you want to be in engineering, they want a math and science recommendation.
Interesting.
A lot of schools don't care. In my experience, the places I worked, we didn't care who wrote the letters, providing they could give us some sort of intellectual, and personal kind of, tangible and intangible qualities. We didn't care if it was a first-year gym teacher, if that was the person who would give us the most information to make the best decision. But I would ask, just because you never know. Some schools, particularly the schools with sciences, might say, yeah, we actually do want a math and science or whatever recommendation. And in that case, you're going to get what you get.
Right. Okay, so talk about this word optional in the college admissions process. Like how should people interpret that?
Yeah. This is my opinion. Nothing is optional except testing in the age of a pandemic.
Right.
Nothing is optional. And for me, gosh, it would drive me crazy. It would drive me bananas if someone didn't, we mail in an optional piece. And I think that all that's doing is telling the admissions committee that you're not taking the time to, write a 250-word supplemental essay or, show up to an alumni interview if it's offered. Some schools, they won't offer it, that's a whole nother thing. But I also think the optional stuff is often, again, where you can get information, squeezed into an application in a tricky way. I talk a lot about the short answers, which are, a lot of schools have optional supplements, or supplements, some are optional, some aren't, but they'll ask you like, why do you want to go to Duke, right? In 250 words. Or some of them are a little crazy. They'll say, what's your favorite playlist from the past year of music? And you think to yourself, why would I take the time to write this? And the answer is because you're helping the admissions officer / lawyer, right, present evidence. And we'd see so many essays that were very, very good. And it would drive me crazy if I'd see a short answer that was like 2 sloppy sentences that clearly the person didn't bother to edit or think about, because it was just showing us that they didn't care, or that their writing was really the 2 sloppy sentences and that they, maybe got a little too much help with their
So, I mean, there is a lot of emphasis on the Common App essay, and then a little bit, the supplements are a little bit of an afterthought. I mean, kids focus on them, but it doesn't get as much as the same focus. And you're saying that's kind of where you can see kind of where people are putting in the effort.
Most essays are good. And that's the problem, right? It's a blessing because most the big Common App essays are good. But you need more, you need to squeeze more into that application if you want to be competitive. And so for me, I often got more out of the optional questions or the short answers, or even there's a question on the Common App that says, which of these activities is your most significant and why? And so many students would, and rightfully so, I made the same mistake. They'd say, soccer is my most significant activity because I'm captain and blah, blah, blah. And in the rest of the application, we would see your soccer captain because it's on your resume. Maybe your teachers would say your soccer captain. Maybe you get a recommendation from your soccer coach. And that was a lost opportunity because it wasn't giving us anything new. And so, and I'm not saying, you know, if soccer is your most significant extracurricular, great, but tell us a particular, tell us something personal, tell us about like, you love soccer because you love the bus rides home because you get to sit with a classmate and find out, you know, like whatever it is. Those are helpful. And, you know, I'm going to tell my email address story very quickly.
Yeah, somebody was asking for it.
Yeah. So I've had to, all of the details, by the way, in the book and that I'm talking about, I've had to make confidential for confidentiality reasons. But in the book, I talk about how one year we got an application and everything else in the application was quite strong in context of that year's pool, with the exception of the young man. He used the email address ibreakforhotmoms@gmail.com. And we literally looked at this and we were thinking to ourselves, like, you know, it was almost like self-sabotage. Like, why would you use that email address? And he wasn't the only one. We'd see some ridiculous email addresses. And I think kids weren't thinking, or they just, who knows? But I would use the opposite example to say there were also some times that we would, you know, a kid's email address would be, you know, let's drive hybrid cars @Gmail address, or Shakespearean lover @Gmail address, or, you know, recycling, you know, forever, you know, that's another way. Like, it sounds totally nuts. And I'm not telling you, you know, your first name, last name @Gmail is also perfect, but it's a great example of every little piece of this paper application is telling us something about you. And unfortunately, we don't know you. There were 20,000 applicants to Dartmouth. We don't know 20,000 human beings. We're taking their paper applications. We're reading through them. We're trying to make evidence for, or, you know, a weaker pool. And any kind of little way you can squeeze in details about yourself is just going to help that admissions committee say, wow, this kid cares about driving, you know, electric cars, and let's look more in this application for other, you know, evidence of X, Y, or Z.
So let's flip it. Like, I mean, we've been talking about the admissions officer kind of trying to piece together the puzzle of who the student is, but let's flip it a little bit, because you give advice for families and students about how they should pick apart, like, understanding a college. You know, when you wrote this, and, you know, there was the most people were able to do college visits. Some people have still, you know, starting to be able to do a little bit over the summer. But whether you can do a college visit in person or you know, are limited, there are ways to kind of, you know, be the investigator of figuring out what the college is all about, and then talk about how that can be really useful in their application.
Yeah. So first of all, I feel for families right now, right? It's hard. I feel for admissions offices because they're trying to do their best too. And so if you can't physically go to college, I mean, I think obviously the obvious steps are the admissions website, the course catalogs, et cetera, et cetera. I have a few little tricks. One of which I tell students to read the online campus newspaper. Almost every school has one, right? The Dartmouth has the Dartmouth.com. And I think that's a great way. You know, the op-eds in there will tell you, like, what are the hot topics on campus, right? The events calendar, even in a pandemic year, like, what's actually happening on campus. You know, I just feel like a campus newspaper is up to date, it's current, and it's often, you know, mostly written by students. And therefore you can really get to, like, the hot topics on campus, the issues at hand. So I really encourage students to read campus newspapers. Same goes for, this is a little bit trickier, but I had a family recently saying that they were looking at a school, and I said, pay attention to where they're spending their money.
The way the school is spending them. And how would a student or family kind of like pick that apart?
New buildings, right? Like, hey, we have a new arts wing, right? So you think to yourself, okay, well, they're investing money in the arts wing, therefore they're investing money probably in professors in the arts, therefore they're probably looking for students who, you know, you know, it's pretty obvious if you walk around a campus where they're spending their money, at least in a general way, so that students can make a decision about, hey, you know, I don't see a lot happening in, you know, the French department, but I see them spending a lot of money for the pre-business programs, right? So I would see how campuses are.
I mean, I'm just curious, is it so, can kind of family just like say to an admissions officer if they're visiting something, like kind of like what are the school's priorities?
Yeah. but what's new? What's new on
Yeah,
campus?
yeah, that's
What's
good.
new on campus, right?
Yeah.
Like, have you built, like, where are you building? And, for some places, pre-pandemic, it was a lot of, hey, we're doing off-campus programs, right? Well, where are you doing your off-campus programs? Because often where you're doing your off-campus programs will tell us a little bit about, where you're spending your money for the on-campus program. You can kind of, and it can be hard, but I just think that's walking around campus. If you see a new arts wing, you know that they're going to need to support that, right? So that's interesting to me. I also think, and Debbie, you would know this better, but if there's a way to connect with alumni in your area, and it can be hard because it can be hard to find them. It also, you can have a mismatch.
Actually,
right?
It's really not hard. LinkedIn.
Yep.
LinkedIn. It's
LinkedIn, and I think that's a great way to hear different perspectives as well, because different people have different experiences. And then lastly, and this can be hard, but I had a student who subscribed to the alumni magazine for the same reason as kind of the campus magazine. It only comes out quarterly, but again, alumni magazines, you can find a lot of their articles online. You can see what people are talking about. So I think any kind of forum that involves the current body, the faculty and alumni can kind of give you an idea of what are the trends, what are the hot topics on campus. So yeah, if nothing else, read those campus newspapers, because that's really helpful.
And where did you see that it was important that if students kind of went the extra distance to really understand a school, that you would see it in an application? Like, did that strike you as like, oh, wow, this person took the extra time to learn about this program?
Absolutely. I mean, I think of, I used the example before of like, why do you want to go to Duke, right? A lot of these schools ask these questions, and my best advice is if you're regurgitating something that you can find online, it's not a good answer. Because everybody else is doing the same thing, right? Like, I'm going to Google Duke and I'm going to say, oh, they have small, student to faculty, whatever. So you got to go a little deeper. And what that means, you can still do it online, right? With the pandemic, you can still, go into a course catalog and look at, if you're interested in, primates, find their, find classes on, simian study. You got to go a little bit deeper. But it's the same argument I made earlier. Like, you want to prove that you're interested in that school and that you're willing to take 5 minutes to go a little bit deeper than everybody else that can just kind of give the generic answer.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, I'm just going to take a tiny break, although, and then we only have 2 questions after that, and then maybe we'll pick up some of the questions. But I'm going to read, and hopefully you guys have been contacted by Mindy. We have the 10 people who are getting 10 free books. So it's Trish Boville, Zanep Axke, Jackie Har, Stephanie Stock, Karen Cho, Lori Brown, Sherry Krebs, Carolyn Davis, Sonia Ria, and Elizabeth Greer. Congratulations. And hopefully look for Mindy. It will be messaging you like through the little Zoom message so that we can get all your information. So thanks for showing up, and congrats that you have a free book.
Thank you.
So 2 quick questions, and actually, well, one kind of relates to I'm looking at a question here that somebody is asking, and there I'll read theirs and then I'll kind of fold it into what I had. So Quentin's asking how much weight is given to the regionality or the zip code for where the student is coming from, and that kind of relates to something you talk about in the book. It's kind of like how important is it, like, from the school that you come from and how you rank in that school, whether it was a big school and you're, a big public school and you're at the top, or a small private school, kind of like all the environment in which you're coming from. How important does that play in the decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to break it down quickly, but in 2 parts. Number one, kind of where am I applying from, right? If I'm applying from New Mexico to a school like Dartmouth, does it give me an advantage from Massachusetts?
Right.
And the truth is, yes and no. I mean, we want a diverse class, and that includes geographic representation. If there are no strong applicants from New Mexico, then there are no strong, that would happen some years. But what happens is that, as I mentioned before, there's a geographic person at most schools who is responsible for a particular area. So they're going to get to know everybody in New Jersey, everybody, for me, it was New Jersey, Florida, and Utah, right? Those are my places. And we did read by state. And so, and we did that a lot because they do. A lot of them have things in common. A lot of people go to the same state fairs and the state science fairs, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a way of kind of organizing. So yes and no. I mean, I do think if you're at a school, if you're in a state that's very represented in applicants to a particular school, you might not stand out as someone who's at a state less represented, but don't forget, again, self-selecting pool, they're going to admit more students likely from the overrepresented state. So, it is what it is. But I think the second question is really interesting. And it's the number one question I got at Dartmouth, which was, is it better to be a valedictorian at a less ranked school or to be middle of my class at a fancier, private resource school? And the answer to that is that it comes down to context. And so what would happen is there's something called the school profile. And if you guys don't have them, go get them.
It's from your high school, right? Each high school has one.
Each high school has something called the high school profile. You can probably get it online from your high school, but it's a document that lists information about your high school. So it'll say, we have APs, but we, only offer 4 honors classes. They'll tell us, is the GPA unweighted or weighted? They'll just give us information so that we can read that. And we use that high school profile as the map key to understanding your transcript, because otherwise it'd be impossible. So we look at your transcript, we look at your high school profile, and we say, okay, what is the student doing with the opportunities available to him or her? Now, as an example, I went to a big public high school in New Jersey. It was an unweighted rank, which meant the valedictorian, in my case, might not have been taking as difficult classes as someone who was ranked 12th, 13th, 14th in the class. But the person who read that application would know that because they'd read the high school profile. And so is it better to be in one place or another? It all comes down to what you're doing at that particular school, because the admissions committee is going to read that high school profile and say, hey, I see, whatever I see. Where you can take back control of this process is, I think, giving us more information. If there's anything you find relevant, I think that's great. And so, for example, if you say, hey, no one else is going to tell you this, but Mrs. Shoemaker has never given an A in the 26 years she's taught honors English. There's nothing wrong with you telling us that. It's just giving us information, right? And if it's backed up by maybe a school counselor, that's even better. But if there's anything you're worried about when it comes to schooling, don't be afraid to be your own advocate in the process. But I think, I would have tons of families come to me and they'd say, we're trying to make a decision where to send little Johnny to school. And I would say, you know what, go to the school that makes best sense for that kid, because that's where they will flourish the most. And therefore that will bring out the best in their application. And the admissions counselors are reading those high school profiles to get a sense of what's available to you anyway.
So Stacy's asking, kind of in the similar conversation that we're having. So how does a great high school student stand out if they're truly coming from a very competitive high school where there are so many other great students? And so it's almost like their greatness now becomes average, but it's because of where they're coming from.
Yeah. Well, we'll again, the high school profile oftentimes will tell us that. And for example, and I hate, again, this goes back to testing, and I hate putting too much emphasis on testing, but sometimes we'll see a high school profile that says the average SAT score for the whole senior class is a 1410, and we'll go, holy mackerel, right? So we'll get information in that high school profile, and also a lot of these admissions officers are very familiar with high schools. I know a lot about the high schools in New Jersey. I know a lot about the high schools that are public high schools that are incredibly competitive with students, who would be fine at Dartmouth, even if they were in the mid 50% of their class. And so, but I think, again, be your own advocate. And if you're worried about that, don't be afraid to say, hey, just want to remind you that, in last year's senior class, 24 of them went to Ivy League colleges. I think you can be your own advocate for speaking up with how competitive your school is.
And does it matter anymore that so many schools aren't doing rankings? Does not having that information impact, how you made a decision or how you evaluated someone?
Yeah, not really. I mean, because again, we're not comparing apples and oranges, or we are comparing apples and oranges and bananas and melons. I mean, everybody has a different school system. We have, there's a school up the street that has no grades, right? So we're just doing the best with what we have. And again, because these pools, again, we're not seeing lots of C transcripts here.
Right.
And so, people aren't, getting nitpicky about, oh, this one got a B- and this one got a B+, but rather okay, what kind of intellectual qualities are we seeing in this whole application, in your own writing, in your recommendations, in your alumni interview? Like, what is the evidence from the holistic application that's giving us a picture of this academic background, so that we don't have to sit there and go, well, this one got a B+ in honors English and this one only got a B.
And just to remind everybody, you basically follow the journey of figuring out how to go to college, and then the college admissions process. And through each, chapter, you're giving that great combination of prescriptive how-tos, from like your perspective, and also some stories that illustrate, those how-tos. So that's what's, really valuable about the book, is that, I mean, we've touched on just some of them, but, in here, in each chapter, there's much more, good, actionable detail about how parents can, use the information. Parents and students can use the information to, impact their journey, impact their students' choices, impact how their application ultimately comes together and is presented.
Yeah.
So my last question, and then we'll pick a few questions that people have written here, and is, we've talked about, this process. Maybe what we've talked about tonight leaned a little bit heavily towards, not just the Ivies, but I'll say more selective schools. But cost is a factor these days. And I know you did not work in the financial aid department, or office. And so this isn't like a financial aid opinion, but I'm just kind of curious, kind of sitting back, seeing like this admissions process, seeing the costs of what the colleges, run these days. Any thoughts? Like, is this all worth it?
Yeah. I think that, well, first of all, I think we have a call to action that we need to do more research. Jacques Steinberg, I think it was 2 years ago, wrote a great article in the New York Times about how, what is the worth of a Ivy diploma as opposed to, a non-Ivy diploma when it comes to jobs. And the bottom line is there's so many variables. It depends on your major. It depends on your, network. It depends on where you came from. It depends on, there's so many variables. I think, and this is my own experience, financial aid is the most important piece here, because you don't want to start this process until you have a conversation with your family members or whoever is going to be help supporting you, and understanding how financial aid works. What's a merit scholarship, right? What is need blind versus need aware? There are many schools that are need blind, which means it doesn't matter if you need financial aid or not. There are others that are need aware, which means if you need financial aid, you might be at a disadvantage. And that particularly really affects international populations. But I mean,
you were pretty honest in the book about international populations, that you had to take students based on whether more likely whether they could pay full price.
Right. Again, admissions is a business, and they need, full pay students is a term that people will use. And so I think there are many variables when ultimately choosing where you end up. But I think that, what you want out of this ultimately is going to, answer your own questions. And so if you're someone who's like, I want to be a school teacher, I want to be back in Florida near my family, what's the best way to get there? Unfortunately, a lot of our kids don't know what they want to be, or they'll change their mind, which is actually fortunate, I think, right? We'll change our mind. But I do think, affordability is very important. And right now, most schools have something called the net price calculator on their website. So you can go, for example, to Dartmouth, and if your finances aren't too complicated, you can enter in some numbers, and they will tell you what you could expect to pay and how much you could expect to get from financial aid, or how much financial assistance you could get. And so it's the net price calculator. That's the name of this thing. It's on many, many colleges.
It's on almost every college website.
This is the expert. But I would say, for me, that's the most important piece here is, what am I doing, and what is this going to cost me in the end?
Okay, so I have a question that somebody wrote in, and then I'll pull some from what people wrote tonight. How, if at all, does a preferred major impact a student's odds of admission? So like if somebody was saying, does the fact that if somebody is interested in being an engineering major, versus French literature, is that going to impact their potential admissibility?
That's a very good question. So it differs by school. I know, for example, engineering schools, right? you have to self-select into that pool. Therefore, that will, at places like Dartmouth or St. Lawrence or Colby, when I worked there, it didn't matter at all. You could say that you wanted to major in something we didn't even have. And of course, we'd probably roll our eyes a little bit and say, "Here, your homework, right? You're showing us you didn't even bother to look at our." But we didn't have to pay attention to that. Luckily for us at those schools, because students changed their mind. The most popular major was undecided. So and
that's a good point, that people shouldn't be concerned if they if their student is applying undecided. Like, that's not necessarily going to hurt them.
Correct. However, I would say that if you were planning on majoring in something that was outside of the more popular majors, and if there was evidence throughout your application that you had great experience with that particular subject, I mean, that was always interesting to us, right? Because we wouldn't see as many people who wanted to major in, Latin, let's say, as we would economics. So if you had taken Latin in high school and if you had more evidence of like, this is really interesting to me, it would make you, again, we're looking for people who are going to contribute differently and who are going to add to the diversity of the pool. But just stating that you're going to be a Latin major and having one Latin teacher recommendation wasn't necessarily going to help you get in over someone else who said they wanted to be econ with so many other econ people, because we knew that most students changed their minds.
Right. Okay. Well, then that's comforting to know that, that you don't have to make this decision and stick to it, when you're 17 and there's so much else going on. Okay. Somebody's asking, do you have any review tips, like any tips that maybe people could think about, like, before they're sending in the application? Almost like I liked your comment about read your essay and can you summarize it in a sentence?
Yeah. I think yes, I have some advice. I think before you even start your personal statement, right? Before you even think about your essay, think about what topic could you write about that your best friend could identify if put in a room with 1,000 other essays that were anonymous. And so what that means is you don't want to write about being on the soccer team. Like, before you even start writing, you don't want to write about being on the soccer team because so many other people could write about being on the soccer team, right? So you got to get a little bit deeper than that. So before you even start writing, just start to think about things that you and only you could talk about. And that's hard for students, but I do think, before you get pulled into these kind of actual writing exercises, jot some ideas down and say, hey, I love playing soccer, but what I like best about playing soccer is, the bus ride home from away games, because I get to sit next to the coach and I really love talking to him about how much he loves watching World Cup, like something like that. Just start writing down some ideas, because I think so many kids just sit down and start writing without kind of brainstorming beforehand. And again, it takes the pressure off. My other piece of advice has to do with the actual activities page, like the resume page. That's a trap, because you're gonna look at this page and there's so many spaces and you're gonna feel like you have to fill them all in.
Yeah.
And it's complicated because it says, like, did you do this?
And you only have a certain number of characters.
You only have so many characters. It's going to ask you, like, did you do this 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th? You're going to sit there and go, I wish I did it. It's whatever. So I think, again, start early, start on a piece of paper. And what's most important on that activity page is that you're actually explaining to us what interests you outside of the classroom. And it's as simple as that. You don't have to fill in every box. We're not sitting there saying to ourselves, wow, they didn't do community service. We're not sitting there counting, but instead we're a human being. Like, we're looking at this list and we're saying, okay, wow, this kid has a lot of community service, right? And so that's interesting to them. But the number one mistake kids make on that page is they assume that we have any idea what acronyms they're talking about. We see lots of acronyms. Like, I'm the president of NBFDA, and we have no idea what that is. And then if they explain what it is, or if they tell, if they write out the word, we still might not know what that entails. And so I use the example in my book. I was president of National Honor Society, and I did nothing as president of National Honor Society. It was just for the resume. And yet I would read some applications when I worked at Dartmouth from presidents of National Honor Society who took the time to carefully write in the allotted number of words exactly what they did with their title. And you know, they could say, hey, you know, raise $10,000 for a prom trip through candy bars, you know, whatever it is. But I think what you want to do is stop worrying about filling in boxes, but instead explain the boxes that you've already done for your own sake. And because for us, we would read these lists and we're like, we don't even know what you're talking about with clubs that we've never heard of. And even so, you know, it's very different what one president of a national honor society does at one school versus maybe another one that, you know, so you really want to just kind of, again, use as much information to tell us exactly what you're already doing so that we're not.
And sounds like it's like less about the title, you know, and more about what you did with that, whatever that role was.
Totally.
Okay, here's a quick question. Is it true that alumni interviews do not weigh heavily?
I laugh just because it's a complicated question. I'm talking to my interviewer. They do, here's
Look, actually, this is what I would actually tell people. I don't know if it's right. Yeah. I would say, I can't get you in, but there might be something here that could keep you out.
Yeah, and I find them to be confirming. That's the word that I didn't use in the book, and I wish I did. I read a whole chapter about alumni interviews because I do think, again, same thing, take control back of the process. This is an opportunity for you as students to ask questions of an alumni.
And actually, that what I would actually always say too is this is your opportunity. This is one more opportunity in the process that I can kind of share your story with the admissions office.
Exactly. And the best thing about alumni interviews is that they can add anything to your application. It's not like these perfect little, like, what are your activities? What are your SATs? They can tell us about how much you love your grandmother, right? And so that's why I love the interviews, is that they're a conversation. And so I would, you know, if offered, definitely go, bring a resume, put your best foot forward, be on your best behavior, because thank you to the alumni interviewers, they're giving their time. It's very rare that an alumni interviewer will say, you know, we'll read it and we'll go, oh, this just made the whole thing go to the admit pile, right?
Right.
If you're kind of a jerk, or if you show up, you don't show up, you know, we've seen that every so often.
I had that where students don't reply after multiple times of contacting them. And that said something to me.
Absolutely. And so I think they are confirming. And again, you want as much confirmation. The application, I have two toddlers. We do toddler puzzles all day, right? Like 10-piece puzzles, which are exactly what an application is. It has about 10 pieces. And so again, if it's an elephant, if it's a toddler puzzle with 10 pieces and it's an elephant, you want to give them as much of that elephant picture so that they see it's an elephant. And if you don't go to an alumni interview, you know, you might not see the trunk. And if you don't, you know, fill out the optional supplement, you might not see the ear. And you want this puzzle to be as clear as possible. And so you want to just advocate, be thorough, and you will feel so good about yourself if you put forward the best application. And when I say the best, I mean your best,
right?
Not it doesn't have to be a valedictorian. It doesn't have to have a perfect SATs. But if you sit there and say, you know what, I explain to them who I am and what I care about, then no matter where you end up, you'll know that, you know, you did your best. And that's all that matters at the end of the day, because admissions is a business, and, you know, the odds sometimes are with you, sometimes against you. But as long as you put your best forward,
you've done the most you can.
You've done the best you can.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect comment to end on. Thank you so much, Becky. Just a little tidbit that it's very hot on the East Coast, and Becky told us that she is in a room that doesn't have any air conditioning.
And a big glass of water. I'm sorry if you've seen the sweat more often. Central Vermont, we usually don't need air conditioning that often in Central Vermont. Today we did.
So thank you everybody for coming. Good luck to the 10 people who got the book, and everybody else, please go out and purchase it. It's really, first of all, it's a lovely, easy read. It's a fun read because of all the stories that you've put in it. And if you have a student who's in, quite honestly, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, you will get very actionable tips out of reading it. So thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you everyone out there. I literally have goosebumps looking at all of your locations. So I appreciate your time, and Debbie, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, good luck to everybody, and we'll see you soon. And maybe we'll see you again, Becky, doing other stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care. Bye.